Hello everyone and welcome to the Dyslexia Life Hack Show. I'm your host Matthew Head, and in this episode I'm talking to Jenny Sandler. She is a specialist dyslexia, autism and ADHD teacher and consultant. You can find her via our website homeschooleduk.com. Her background is in teaching for state, independent and international schools. In 2010 she moved into consultancy and coaching, where she uses her previous experience to advise families and schools. As always, there will be extended show notes at dyslexialifehacks.com/podcast. Welcome to the show, Jenny.
Thank you for having me, Matt. It's a pleasure to be here.
And no problem at all. Where I thought I would kick off initially is that obviously your website's called Homeschool UK, and you are now based in the UK, but quite a few of the listeners will have initially picked up that you don't sound very British.
Well, you're right. I don't sound very British, but I am actually very British. I was born in Liverpool to parents who were also both born in Liverpool. But when I was about 7, my dad got a job in California, so I grew up in California. And I went to school there. I went to university in Boston. And then as soon as I finished university, I thought I would take a gap year in London since I have a British passport. And I went on that gap year in 2003, and I'm still on my gap year. I'm still trying to figure out, what to do when I grow up 22 years later. So, so I'm American and British.
Yes. That's one hell of a gap year.
Yeah, I know.
So what was it about the gap year that you wanted to stay for this long?
Well, I had originally come to London not to teach. I came to work in children's educational television because I'm sure, as you've picked up over the years, of interviewing people who are neurodivergent or about neurodivergency, you may have learned that people tend to have random career paths or kind of go with the flow and try different things. So although I had trained to be a teacher at university, I didn't feel like I was quite ready to settle down and be something as traditional as a teacher. And I had this ambition to educate on a huge scale. And I thought, well, why teach a class of 20 kids when I can teach millions through quality educational television? And I had this idea, and my parents, of course, thought, you're mad. All my friends thought I was mad. And I looked online where to find a job. I had done, at university, every summer I had done a different work experience in media. So I'd worked for Radio Disney, the local news channel, an independent filmmaker. So it wasn't so random that I was interested in television. But when I was researching where to do this career, where to start my amazing career educating millions of children through my quality programming, I came across a website for a company called Children's BBC.
Ah, good place to start.
Yes. And I saw this website and I thought, oh my God, this is amazing. We have nothing equivalent in the States. They have drama. They have factual. They have education. They have news. They had all these different departments. And so many of those departments were actually, relevant to what I wanted to do. So I literally emailed someone who worked for, they call it production talent management, which is like HR for the TV industry, but not for on screen, but for behind screen. So I found an email. I emailed and I said that I've just, graduated. I'm a certified teacher. And I listed my various experience that I'd had in the different TV, news, radio, but I sort of inadvertently oversold myself. So I had said in my email that I had been an assistant producer for a local news channel. It actually wasn't local news. It was the local news version of an international channel, ABC News. ABC is huge. And I was, interning, unpaid work experience in the Boston station for that. So yes, it was an incredible experience. And yes, I assisted the producer, but
right.
I was not an assistant producer, but I actually didn't know that. I was very naive. And so, I think I really impressed the production talent manager at Children's BBC in London. And she said, well, when can you come? We'll interview you when you get here. And I said, well, I can come. I finished my summer job. I'll come in the beginning of September. I have a British passport. It's all fine. Literally got on a plane with a ton of luggage. I calculated that it was cheaper for me to pay for extra suitcases than it was to ship things. So I rock up. Yeah, I mean, this was probably not anymore, but back then in 2003, I rock up with like a trunk, like a Harry Potter trunk and all my luggage. And I went, because, I'm British, I have family here. I went to my aunt and uncle's house who live in London, and I turned up with all my stuff. And I spent the weekend watching Children's BBC because I'd never seen any of it before. This is before the days of being able to access other countries' TV online, although you still can't access the BBC from the States. But anyway, so I spent the weekend in front of Children's BBC, went into this interview where she completely ripped me apart because I clearly did not have the experience that I had made out that I had. But this lovely PA, I think, took pity on me, and she offered me a work experience in a Children's BBC's apartment. And I enjoyed that work experience, and I actually met my best friend there. And then I went and I spoke to people and I networked, and I then got a paid job at Children's BBC. And that sort of started my very brief career in television. And I didn't realize, though, that you have to constantly work to get your next role. I wasn't prepared for that. I worked to get my first role and then thought, right, the rest will come. But it didn't work like that. And so I had a lot of temp jobs, and I went and I studied journalism. And then I had a few other paid jobs. It wasn't all, working for free. But basically, after sort of 2 years in television, I realized it's not what I thought it was. I wasn't educating millions. I didn't like constantly having to worry about my next role. I didn't like always having to go out and network and drink and schmooze. And I said, right, well, I'm a teacher. Now I'm ready to teach. So I should go back to the States where I'm actually qualified and licensed and start teaching. But of course, by this point, I'd met someone and I kind of knew that we were probably going to get married. And I stayed. So that's the very, very long version of why I'm here in London.
Yes, there's always some romance involved somewhere.
Yeah, I could have just said to you, you said, why am I still here 20 years later? I could have just said I met a guy.
Oh, no. The TV story was the bit I would have wanted on. I'd have pressed you a bit hard on the met a guy answer.
Yeah, that's boring. I mean, met a guy, we got married, we have kids. Yeah.
So, did you have to convert your American qualifications over to more British versions of them to get into teaching over here?
Again, that's a really interesting question, and I don't have the short answer.
Good, this is a long podcast.
You're not going to believe the trouble I had trying to authenticate myself. So, there is an organization called NARIC. I forget what it stands for, but it basically takes degree qualifications from other countries and says what the equivalent is in the UK. So I had to do that, and that gave my degree, basically said that I have a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology and Education. That's all true, but it doesn't authenticate your teaching certification. And if I was a teacher from an EU country, probably not now since Brexit, but back then, any teacher from an EU country would automatically have their license and certification transferred. So it didn't matter if I was from Spain and didn't speak any English, I could be a licensed teacher in the UK. But because I was American, not an EU country, my license didn't count. And I needed to get it I either needed an entirely new one or I needed to do something called the Overseas Trained Teacher Program, which I wasn't thrilled about because it was basically like going back to doing what I had just recently done. And so initially I worked at an American school, so it didn't matter. And then I moved into the British sector with the aim to get a British qualification. And I was working at an independent school because it's much easier to be hired at an independent school when you're not qualified teacher. So I don't have what you call in this country QTS, qualified teacher status. And so I was at an independent school, and I applied for the overseas trained teacher program at my local university that, in my part of London, which was down the road from the school I was working in. I did this whole application, and they rejected me because I was in an independent school and I needed to have been in a state school. And I was really annoyed because there was nowhere in the fine print that had said that. I would have known. If I had known, I would have checked that. So I was really, really irritated by that because it says big catch 22. You can't get a job in a state school unless you have QTS. But how could I get QTS if I had to be in a state school in order to do the overseas trained teacher program?
Yes.
Yeah. So there are ways around it. I could have applied to a different university for the overseas trained teacher program, or I could have found a state school to sponsor me through it, but I would have been paid peanuts while I was doing that. So that was actually the point at which I stopped teaching in the classroom and started doing my own thing. So I never set out to be a homeschool teacher. I never set out to be a private tutor. I never set out to be a specialist autism, ADHD, dyslexia teacher. Just kind of life, takes you there. And so it was frustrating because I knew that for my career or to, be a normal classroom teacher, I needed to go back to the States. But I was married to someone from London who was probably the only man I had met in my early years in London who was completely not bothered about me being American. So, he didn't care. He was like, what's the big deal? So what? You're American. I don't want to live in the States. Okay, Whereas, when I first moved, I met, I was young and I was meeting a lot of people, and I would meet these guys and they'd be, oh my God, you're American? Will you marry me? Not because they fancy me so much, but because they wanted a green card. So I actually married the one guy who really just did not care at all.
So dating a vice British man.
Yeah. Find the one who's not bothered about, where you're from. So I knew I wasn't going back, and I didn't want to. I was very happy here. And I'm glad I didn't, because it's all works out really, nicely for me. So the answer to your question is no, I never got a British equivalent. I don't have QTS. Yeah, so I basically fell into tutoring. I started tutoring a family who homeschooled. They happened to be American. That was a coincidence.
Right. Tape you in slowly. I know how you guys been taught.
Or maybe not such a coincidence. Maybe they liked that they found a teacher who's American, who understood the American system. So I started just working with this family once a week while I was still teaching in a mainstream school. And then the following year, they said, will you be our full-time homeschool teacher? And so I did. And they were an incredible family. And they really believed in attachment parenting. And that's why they homeschooled. They sort of felt like, why should the school have the best of their child? They would like to have the best time of their child, because kids are kind of grumpy when they come home from school. At least mine are. My kids go to school. I'm going to say that right now. Homeschooling is not for me. I'm very happy to homeschool other people's children, but
right,
not
okay.
Okay. But this family said to me, when you're going to have children one day, and we want you to bring your children when you teach our kids, wear your baby in a sling, nurse your baby, breastfeed your baby while you're teaching our kids. And I did. It really, well, for my eldest, I did it for my eldest. It really, really worked out for me. So I got to work, I got to have him with me, and they were really relaxed. So it was definitely an incredible opportunity for me to have that experience.
So I just want to clear up the qualifications thing. So you need a QTS to work in a state school. You don't need that for an independent school or to home teach anybody.
No, you don't. The home education is unregulated. They're trying now.
Right.
Now that, they're trying to get some more government control. They want lists of people who are home educated, but there's still no as far as I'm aware, there's no kind of checking in on people like me. But I mean, as it goes, I'm very transparent. I have a digital footprint. So, I'm generally not the type of person that a government body would be concerned about. It's more sort of fake schools or parents who aren't actually teaching their children. But generally, if you have an extra, a third person who you're paying, a third party to come in, generally that's seen by authorities as a positive. And of course, I'm DBS checked and I have public liability insurance. I mean, I have insurance. I think that's the type of insurance I have. I also have 2 master's degrees, one in literacy and one in autism. So although I don't have QTS, I'm very educated and qualified as well.
I wasn't worrying. I just was curious how it all ties up, and how sort of barrier to entry at QTS differs when you're not trying to work for a state school. So where did the sort of neurodiversity arm to this come in? So you've explained, obviously, you swapped into more out of necessity doing homeschooling, but now you're a specialist in dyslexia, autism, ADHD, as well as many other things. What sort of started to excite your interest in specialising in neurodiversity?
So when I was teaching at the American school, I did a master's degree in literacy. It's called Literacy Learning and Literacy Difficulties, which is just basically how people learn to read and what gets in the way of learning how to read, which is, in a nutshell, dyslexia. So I'd studied that. Growing up, though, my younger brother and my mother are both dyslexic. So it was something that I was always exposed to and aware of, although I never set out to, work with dyslexic. In fact, if anything, having my brother as my brother, it probably, younger Jenny would have been like, God, no, I'm not going anywhere near dyslexia. But my brother likes to think that he has inspired me. So we'll say, James, you have partially inspired me. But it's definitely something that I've always known about. I've always understood. And then when I started homeschooling and I, was looking for other roles and I signed up for an agency, I think because of my, master's in literacy and because I had been given a lot of training and professional development I wouldn't say in neurodivergent conditions, but when I worked at the American school, we learned a lot about sensory integration and occupational therapy and why a child would need occupational therapy and how occupational therapy can help support learning and physical development and emotional development. So just by virtue of that, I had a greater understanding of different learning needs. And so every time there was a role that came up with an agency where it wasn't a straightforward pupil, so they were dyslexic or suspected dyslexic, or at this point, no one had any labels, but suspected autism, or some with ADHD, then they would contact me and I would go and I would work with those students. And I was definitely learning on the job. I had some experience, but not a ton. And I, figured it out as I went along. I could see what worked for this child, what worked for that child, what I could take. I could take one experience from a student and apply it to another. So I kind of cobbled together my own way of working with neurodivergent children. Obviously, the sort of the straight literacy, working, teaching children how to read, that I had, evidence-based, programs to use. But one thing I've always done, and I think is probably connected to my own learning style and my kind of out of the box thinking or slight inability to conform to what is considered normal or typical, has allowed me to sort of develop my own techniques that I see working. So I'll take things that I know is best practice. Like phonics, for example. I'm not going to do away with phonics. I know how important phonics is, but I also know that a lot of neurodivergent children do not learn to read using phonics. And that if you just go on and on and on and on and on about phonics, you're going to kill it for them and they're not going to learn. So I find ways to incorporate their individual learning style with some phonics so that the two can marry up. So that was kind of my way of working. It's just sort of muddling along, figuring it out. And so I thought, I'm working with more and more autistic children. I really should learn more about this. So I went and did another master's of education in autism in children. And this time when I was studying, so obviously when I'd gone to university the first time, I was, young. I was a teenager in my early 20s. When I did my first master's degree, I was still young. I was an adult, but I didn't have children. And then the third master's degree, I had 3 kids. So it was, a very different experience. And while I was doing that master's degree, I realized that I probably have ADHD. I'd been learning more and more and more about ADHD in girls and women based on the girls I was working with. And as I was now back in an academic setting whilst trying to juggle a job and a family and volunteer work and all, the other, and social life, all the other things I was doing, which is a lot for everyone, but I realized I 100% have ADHD. And so I went and I had myself assessed and diagnosed. And apparently I'm textbook for a woman. And because I was really worried, he's not going to diagnose me. But no, it took him like pretty fast to agree that I have ADHD. And that has then, encouraged me even more. Like it's really, what's the word I'm looking for? Like inspired my teaching and given me such a deeper understanding. And I think I always connected with my students, but now I really connect with them even more. And it's allowed me to, also just understand myself better and go a bit easier on myself or see that, well, something works for me that might work for them, or it might not because I'm not them. I have my own ways. So it makes me more open-minded.
Yeah, definitely. So what does the sort of school day, for want of a better word, look like when you're homeschooling somebody? Because it's not going to be as everybody remembers, 2 hours worth of lessons and a 15-minute break, then lunch, then all the bells, is it? How do you, and you mentioned obviously yourself having ADHD and working with people with neurodiversity, so how do you think about structure and lesson planning and to get all the stuff in that you want to teach in a week?
Yeah. It's complicated because it can be so flexible, and sometimes having a lot of flexibility gets in the way of being organized and structured. It really depends on what the family wants. So normally when I come in to homeschool someone, I'm doing a piece of it. I'm not there 5 days a week. I'm not doing the entire curriculum. So I'm not responsible for planning someone's week. When I was with that original American family, I had set hours that I would come in, and they had the rest of the day filled with music lessons and trips and the stuff that the parents were doing. And in the time that I came, I had to do, it was like English and math and science. So it was kind of, I don't think it was as clear as an hour of English, an hour of math. It was more like I had an hour with the younger one, 2 hours with the older one. And then of course we'd take breaks, and maybe some days we did more English than math. Some days we did more math than English. So it was very, very relaxed. But I usually have a specific remit when I work with a child. So I guess that doesn't really answer your question, how you fit it all in, because I don't know, because I've never actually had to plan a whole week for anybody.
No, it sounds like you probably do sort of think about it, because it sounds quite reactive to what's going on, but there must be, there'll be stuff you need to deliver by the end of the year, isn't there, in terms of exam grades and all that kind of stuff? Or does it not work like that in the homeschooling world?
So in the homeschooling world, it doesn't have to be like that. It depends on the goals of the family, and it also depends on the child. So that family, let's go back to this American family. Those children were neurotypical, and they were very bright. And of course, they went on to do public exams. I mean, they're in university now. But other than them, I've had very few families like that. And the children I work with now all have additional needs, and I strongly believe that they need to be doing what's right for them. So, and because I'm a primary school teacher, public exams like GCSEs and A-levels aren't really on my radar anyway. So I often say to parents, because they get very stressed, how are they going to do their GCSEs? If I'll be working with an 11-year-old, let's say, and the dad is already thinking ahead about GCSEs. And I say, they'll do them. But honestly, look, it's 2025. People are constantly changing careers. People go back to university. It is not a big deal if you do a GCSE when you're 18. If that's the time scale that your child needs to be on so that they can do their best learning and so that their mental health can be in a solid place, then they'll do a GCSE when they're 18. It just doesn't matter. Sometimes people need to be told that or to be reminded of that. But I say there are two types of homeschoolers. There are ideological homeschoolers, which are people who set out to homeschool. They, a bit like this American family, they believe in home educating. And within that camp, there are people who are quite traditional. So they'll follow a curriculum, they'll buy a curriculum, they'll create one, but definitely they want to make sure that their children are able to do public exams, go to university, etc. Then there are other ideological homeschoolers who take a much more relaxed approach. You may have heard it being referred to as unschooling, which is a bit more free range, which is kind of let the children learn math just by cooking or doing science experiments or playing in the garden. Let's learn measuring by let's measure out a plot of garden to grow our own vegetables, which is incredible. And I think, that's great if you can do that. But I also think you do need to sit down with, your squared paper and your pencil and your, math manipulatives to learn actual, formal math. So I'm not dissing that type of learning, but I think that to do it really well, you need to incorporate, some traditional schooling techniques or educational techniques, I should say, not schooling techniques. So that's like the traditional, the ideological homeschoolers. Then there are people who I refer to as circumstantial homeschoolers. And these are my terms. I haven't read them anywhere. I mean, maybe other people use these terms, but this is just something I've kind of come up with over the years. And circumstantial homeschoolers are people who have not chosen to do this, but the situation that their child and their family is in has led to it. So often, where it started with me, a lot of my students were in independent school, and they were autistic or ADHD, and it was not either it wasn't diagnosed or it was not understood, but basically the child was exhibiting behaviors that challenge. And the school wasn't managing it, or the school didn't want to know. And so they would be asked to leave. And then this family kind of had no choice until they could figure out a plan B. They needed to home educate their child. So then I'd be brought in as a team, one member of a teaching team to fill the gaps. And when I started out doing this, as I said, these were children in private school. So I was working with a largely privileged group of people. But I'm sure you read the news and, the number of children who are not accessing their education, the number of children with extreme anxiety and mental health challenges resulting in school refusal means that there are more children than ever who are not in school, who should be in state school, who are not receiving an education. So now I see state school children as well who are flexi-schooled. My work at the moment is made up of going into schools and supporting children and then seeing children at home. But at the moment, all the children I see at home are in school part-time. They're not homeschooled. So they're coming out of school to see me. Schools are agreeing to that now. Since COVID, state schools have become much more flexible.
So do you have to work with the school to what you're going to teach, or is it two very independent things?
I would love to collaborate more with schools, but basically a school, not all schools, but in my experience, a school is very happy for someone else to just take on the work. I don't know, and I'm not saying that to be like I'm not having a dig, because I get it. If you're teaching 30 kids and you have a child whose learning needs are so different to the rest of the class, it's hard. Of course, that child is entitled to what we call a first quality, I forget the expression now. I want to say first quality teaching or best quality teaching. There's an expression that every child is entitled to that. But more often than not in schools, children who need a lot of extra help are put with an LSA, a learning support assistant, who doesn't have the same experience or training or qualifications. And it's really, really hard. I'm not sure now that I could work in a classroom and manage the variety of needs that classroom teachers have. So I don't begrudge a class teacher for kind of, allowing me to take the lead with that child.
No, that makes sense. And it's interesting hearing whether it was separate or a bit more integrated. So do you actually get anything like, I brought this home from school, can you help me with it? Or do you plan completely your own thing out?
So the children who I see, the ones who are flexi-schooled, I do my own thing completely. One of them, I was going into her school last year before the school agreed to allow her out. I would go in, and I did my own thing. But these children are working on a level this girl should not be in a mainstream school. And this one in particular should not be in a mainstream school. Another one I'm not sure about. I'm not prepared to kind of give my verdict on that at the moment. Because he's so young, because time will tell. And the girl who shouldn't be in a mainstream school, her mom is going through hurdle after hurdle after hurdle to get her into a specialist school. The local authority agrees she should be in a specialist school, but there's no space. And then the specialist schools are rejecting her, and the specialist schools are saying she's too special. I mean, like this girl, she's autistic, and one local autism school, which we all thought would be perfect for her, has turned around and said she's not socially motivated enough. Now, what? Right?
Yeah.
I mean, there are autistic people who are socially motivated and who love to be with other people and love friends. It's actually a myth that autistic people are antisocial, but there is still, there are still going to be autistic people who are not socially motivated. And for a specialist autism school to say that, you think, well, what are you there for? So it's really, really, really frustrating. So in the meanwhile, she goes to her mainstream primary school in the morning and comes to me in the afternoons and does other activities in the other days that she doesn't come to me. But in the morning, I go into other state schools, and pull children out of lessons. And so sometimes with those, there's more of a collaboration with the school. Like a teacher might say to me, she's really struggling with ratio and proportion. Can you please go over that? with her. And one of the schools I go into is very close to my house. And because of that, I'm able to go in every morning, so like little and often. So normally when you work with a private teacher or private tutor, you have your lesson, it's 45 minutes, it's an hour. But because the school is so close, I can go every morning and I can see multiple children for 15, 20 minutes. And that's the type of work, or that's the type of teaching that the children I work with really need. Little and often. That's the best way. They don't have the attention span to sit with me for an hour. It's not great to be pulled out of a lesson for that long either. So I have a really good arrangement with that school where I see many children and I just kind of go in and it's like one after the other. I'm there for like sort of 2 hours a morning, see 8 kids and then go home.
Yes, I could see that. Yeah, the little and often, just to sort of help them out and move them along a bit. And yeah, I mean, that's part of the problem with the school system, isn't it? Sitting on a desk for an hour, some people just can't do it. Yeah,
and especially, with learning to read, if someone's so far behind, they need to have that good practice every day.
Yeah, and they need it in short bursts because they get tired if it's a longer burst. Yeah, makes sense. Okay, so what I'm going to do is start winding the podcast up now. And every guest that comes on the show gets 3 rapid-fire questions from me. They don't necessarily need rapid-fire answers from yourself, but they are just quick ones from myself. So let's dive into question number 1.
I'm not very good at rapid-fire, in case you haven't.
Good. Okay, then. So rapid-fire question number 1. What prejudices have you had about dyslexia that's been proven wrong?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I would say the main one is that dyslexic people always struggle to read, because it's not always the case. It's often spelling and writing. And so I meet children who may have may have discovered they're dyslexic a bit later on in their education because they can read, because they love to read and they read a lot. But meanwhile, they're struggling with the writing and the spelling, and they're feeling very bad about themselves, and no one thinks to offer them, that specific support because no one thinks that they might be dyslexic.
Okay. Rapid fire question number 2. If an alien landed and you had to describe dyslexia to them, how would you do it?
The first thing that popped into my head is, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but there's a phonics screening that all kids have to have in year 1.
I'm not familiar, no.
Okay, in state schools, right? So they have something called words, real words, and then they have alien words.
Okay.
And they have these silly little alien cartoons on the word, so it's not a real word. So this one is an alien word.
Yeah.
So it's basically because they want to make sure that children are learning all the phonics rules. So it will have a word like, now I'm going to struggle to think of one. Something like Zooble, Zooble. And that tests that the child can, know that a Z or a Z makes the Z sound, that OO is an OO, and that LE is an O, right? So that's how they're practicing, Anyway, so they have these little aliens on the picture. And that was what popped into my head when you asked me how I would describe dyslexia to an alien. So I would probably get out those cards and I would say they make no sense. So, I would say, well, we're going to have to assume that the alien understands what I'm talking about. But okay, I would say that dyslexia causes challenges with the way that the brain recognizes the image of a sound and then how it processes it to make the actual sound. So to know that OO is OO. And then I would say that people who have this challenge with their phonological processing, because obviously the alien will have heard of phonological processing, people who have this challenge may find it difficult to learn to read, to spell, to write, but that often they have very strong skills in other areas like art or music or math, science, and that it is super important that people who are dyslexic are given the support that they need so that they can access their education, feel great about themselves, and have self-confidence so that they can shine in all areas of their life. And the alien would be like, yeah, of course, totally get that.
Definitely. Okay, and rapid fire question number 3. And seeing as this is the Dyslexia Life Hack show, what is your favourite dyslexia life hack?
Okay. That's an interesting question, because as I'm not dyslexic myself, I haven't sort of developed any hack, because I think hacks usually come from your own need to figure something out. So let me think of some, things that I tell my students. So one thing, it's not really a life hack though, because it's a reading hack, it's a literacy hack, is to use a line guide. So I've got one right here.
Yes, for the benefit of audio, it's the slight transparent piece of plastic with a stripe across it.
Yeah, you don't need anything fancy, but I do find that using a line guide really helps keep your place, because oftentimes dyslexic people and young readers have some visual processing, visual tracking challenges, so your eyes tend to jump all over the place. So it does help you keep your place. But in terms of a life hack, I would say, well, to totally take advantage of all the technology we have now that, we didn't have previously. So to leave yourself voice memos, to use the dictation function, even the basic one that comes on a Chromebook. You don't need a fancy, you don't need that fancy Dragon software. You can, use what you've got. I think that's great for kids. So that would be my hack.
Thank you for that. So, before we sign off, is there anything else you'd like to add, and where can people find you?
So, one other thing that I do, though, and this is something that I enjoy a lot, is working with parents. So, the majority of my work is with children, but I really love when a parent comes to me and says, I'm having some challenges with my child, or I'm not understanding why my child is doing X, Y, and Z. I see this behavior. They don't sleep very well, or they come home from school and the teacher says they've had the most amazing day. They're such a star, but at home they're really difficult. I see aggression. They don't listen. And I love to be able to speak to parents and explain why they might be seeing these behaviors that challenge, what is happening to their child, what their child is going through, and why they might be acting in a certain way, and then helping them to unpick situations, and then helping them figure out what things they can do to best support their child. And sometimes it's like really simple solutions, and sometimes it's a lot harder for us to, figure it out. But so that's the consulting part of my job. And I really, really enjoy that, because I think by now, having, done this for so many years, I've got a lot of experience and I have lived experience. And so I'm really able to connect with parents and help them, with parenting, which is literally the hardest job in the world. And you can find me online. I'm on LinkedIn, Instagram. My website is homeschooluk.com.
Cool. Well, that just leaves me to thank you for taking the time to come on the show.
Sure. And thank you for having me. It was fun. I love talking about myself.
That is handy when you're a guest on a podcast.
Yeah, I was not expecting you to, I wasn't expecting to kind of go down all those rabbit holes about children's BBC and all the other random things I went on about.
They're the fun bits, though. They're the fun bits of finding out all these little fun facts about guests.
You thought I'd be talking about dyslexia, and instead I talked about how I talked my way into a job at Children's BBC.
Yeah, but that's fun, knowing about jobs at Children's BBC.
Anyway, thank you very much. It was lovely to meet you.
And you too. And I want to thank everybody else for taking the time to listen, and I will speak to you in the next episode. Goodbye for now.